Hi everyone. Today I'm joined by Nikos Kourentzes, professor within Predictive Analytics and AI from Skövde University, and also the co-author of the article summarizing the state of the art within hierarchical forecasting. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for being here. So I often get the questions upon at what level that you should do the forecasting at. And I guess that is what hierarchical forecasting is solving, isn't it?
That's right, yes. So traditionally you would think the problem as, let's say we forecast at the disaggregate level, dominated by the demand planners, the forecasting, or it might be at a more aggregate level, let's say by senior management or the sales team. However, if you take it in these different approaches, you would always lose some information. And you would somehow, let's say, impose one opinion to the rest.
Yeah.
Because the question is that you want all these different functions to operate on the same or similar looking forecasts. So if, for instance, we would say, okay, we do a bottom level forecast, so stock keeping units go upwards, or you have, let's say, top level forecast, and you have some, let's say, at a very aggregate level and disaggregate your forecast, or, in between, middle out. You have the question, okay, what is the optimal one? What is the right decision? That is no longer how we see the problem. Now we see the problem that we want to produce forecasts at all levels, because all of these levels contain useful information. And instead of thinking, okay, I pick up this level or that level, I actually want to combine all these forecasts. And therefore, from this combination, I would have one single, let's say, agreement, as we call it, coherent forecast. And we now want to work on that one. And this comes with a lot of advantages. From the more intuitive point of view, all these forecasts will contain different information. Let's say disaggregate may have pricing and promotional planning. Aggregate may have some tactical or strategic decisions, or incorporate, let's say, information from the economy, like inflation and so on.
Yeah.
Recent discussion topic. Yeah. But there is also a lot of statistical sides that give us a benefit. The combination of the forecast reduces the risk. Suppose you're doing a top-down forecast, so you would have a single model doing the top forecast, and then you would disaggregate. You're taking the risk that this forecast may be good or bad. You don't know that easily. Forecast will never be 100% accurate. So even if you have small errors in the beginning, if the model actually is not well calibrated, it will start having at some point very large errors. So you're taking that modeling risk. If you have multiple models, by combining them, effectively you're saying, okay, some of them will be good, some of them will be not so good, but that's fine. The combined is safer. And there is a lot of work in forecast combination in the literature that says that when you do this forecast combination, effectively you will end up having better forecasts, more accurate forecasts.
Amazing. I often hear people from different departments. The lower levels, the demand planners, they definitely think that their forecasting model is the best, while the ones doing the top forecasting, they are complaining that the demand forecast isn't considering a certain number of information. So that's really amazing about getting them all together, and they all get a piece of it.
Yeah, that's right, and that's a bit the whole motivation behind this work. That I should say, from an academic point of view, it started more as how do we solve your initial question? What's the correct level? And then we realized actually a reconciliation approach where we combine is a better approach. But then once we had this tool, we started thinking, how does this relate to the modern problems that firms have? And it's what you just said now, that you have different stakeholders, you have different decisions within a firm. If these are coming from a different point of view from the forecasts, they will end up being misaligned decisions.
Yeah.
And this will cause either lost opportunities because, let's say, you don't have enough stock, or you don't have enough raw materials, or whatever, or not enough budget, or it can cause waste because somewhere you have a bit too much. So this aligned forecasting will cause hopefully aligned planning. I'm saying hopefully because there is always a factor how we translate from one to the other. This brings a bit the research that I have been very interested in myself, which is the temporal side of the hierarchical forecasting. That is, think about short-term planning and long-term planning. if you think about, let's say, mid to senior management, they don't care about the day-to-day forecasting. I mean, they may care, but that's not their primary focus. Whereas if you think about the demand planners, as you said, they would be more interested about being able to help the people who are doing the inventory management. So they have much shorter focus in terms of the horizon. So you could think about the hierarchies not only across products or different demarcations within, let's say, product groups, geography, and so on, but also across time, short-term, daily forecasts, weekly forecast, monthly forecast, or quarterly, let's say, for financial planning. So by having this combination of forecast across, let's say, items and across time, what you end up having, you're having a unified view of all the information in the organization. A lot of the information, especially the more senior you go in the level of aggregation, the more managerial you go, is softer information. It's not easy to put, let's say, in a database and say, I'll add this regression to the model, because it has to do a lot with their expectations, how they understand the competition, the market, and so on. So if back to your example, I would focus mostly on the demand planners. This is information I would miss out. But if I don't focus on the demand planners, then I'm having forecasts that are far away from the customer. So that's why I need both sides. That's where the combination comes in place.
Really, really amazing. I often hear in that regard that the daily forecast, they may be doing a 30-day forecast, and then they use that month forecast in the monthly forecast, moving 12 months ahead, and then they use that year forecast to do a 5-year ahead forecast. From a forecast accuracy perspective, comparing that approach to your approach with temporal hierarchical forecasting, how would it compare?
Yeah, so that's a great example, because it's something I hear far too often myself, and I'm saying that's exactly why I wrote this work.
Yeah.
Let me try to give an easy explanation. When you're doing a forecast, let's say for 1 day ahead, you're going to have some error. If you're going to do 2-day ahead forecast, you're going to take the error from the 1 day ahead, carry it with you, and you have some more error from the 2-day ahead. If you do this for 30 steps ahead, it doesn't matter if it's 30 months or 30 days, it's 30 steps ahead. You're going to start accumulating error one way or another. And also it's quite intuitive that the further away you are from your point of forecasting, it's going to be more difficult to forecast further out. So if you keep your forecasting at a daily level and you want to produce, let's say, a monthly forecast, a yearly forecast, you're asking for trouble. If you would take the same information and aggregate up to months, 30 days is just one step ahead, it's just 1 month. So you will carry less error. I'm not suggesting that the forecast will be by definition more accurate, because you may have a terrible forecasting model for the monthly data. But at least you're not going to have this iterative accumulation of forecast errors. And so your forecast will be with increased confidence, if I can say it like that. So if I now put this thinking within the hierarchical forecasting, what am I doing? I'm saying you want a long-term forecast. The potentially annual forecast or monthly forecast will have an additional contribution to your long-term forecast than your daily forecast. But the daily forecast will also say, look, there is some additional information. So you're not missing that extra, let's say, all this variability that is coming from the intra-week, let's say, sales pattern and so on. So that's where, for instance, the hierarchical approach could come and say, look, we know the daily level contains additional structure, but we also know it's going to be more dangerous if you go further in the future. So if you would take that forecast and a monthly forecast or an annual forecast, if you really want to go that long term, the other forecast has less information. There is no way you can see the intra-week seasonality in the monthly level. It's just not there. There is no way you will see promotional effects in the annual level. It's just not there. But your long-term projections are much, much easier. So combine the two and you get hopefully a better answer. I mean, hopefully we know actually it's going to be a better answer. It's not just hopefully.
Nice. And just while you're here, if you're comparing this to mixed frequency forecasting, like let's say that you're going to do a 5-year ahead forecast and you're already sitting in June, so you already have monthly data up until June, then you could use a mixed frequency model to take that into account. An alternative to that is to do a monthly forecast and a yearly forecast and then reconcile it in your framework.
Yeah.
How would these two approaches compare?
So there are many ways to see this problem, because one could say, look, I'm going to have annual forecasts and I need the annual forecast going from January to December. So if I'm in, let's say, somewhere in between, as your example goes, then I would have a benefit to use monthly information to update my forecast. That would be the so-called nowcasting. And then the mixed frequency would be the natural thing to do, because you already have the annual forecast anyways. If from a temporal hierarchy's point of view, we would just say, well, there are two ways here again. You could say, I just shift the calendar and I produce all my forecasts from now to the future. So the annual forecast will not be now January to December. It will be, let's say we're in April, so it will be from May to next May. And then you would produce that annual forecast, produce your monthly forecast, daily forecast, whatever. If you want to update your previous annual forecast, you could just use the reconciled forecast from May until December. So you would cut the piece you want, because all the numbers are in agreement. You can take it from the most disaggregate once you have fixed it and then do whatever you want with that. You could build nowcasting models as well with this hierarchical framing, where you would have some level saying, this is already done, I cannot update it, this I can update it. The word of caution here is you don't find typically much benefit in going too complicated. Okay. Like, there is a benefit in being able to do small models and make them agree together than making a super model that has too many things to calibrate. So the more parameters you would have in the model, the more data hungry it becomes and the more sensitive it becomes. I mentioned before this idea of the modeling risk. If I build a super model, I revert back to a single model, which may be great or not so great.
Yeah, that's a very interesting angle, and I have so many follow-up questions on this topic. Comparing it to forecast pooling, I mean, here you have built like a lot of different models, but they're in the same level of the hierarchical structure and they're on the same time level. But it's still about like a bit of a reconciliation, or like weighting all of the forecast models together. How would that compare to hierarchical forecasting?
That's a good question, actually, because they are not so far away.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of what do you pull together. In forecast pooling, you typically say, okay, I have to forecast this, let's say, hard to forecast item. And I'm not going to use a single model. I'm going to try build a family of models and then take some of those, the useful pool of models, and combine them with equal or different weights. That's a different question. In hierarchical forecasting, we're saying the thinking is the same, but we're not building multiple models on the same series, but we're building models across different series of different aggregation, either across time or across products, regions, or whatever. But eventually, you still have a lot of different forecasts you're going to combine. Where the hierarchical forecasting has a benefit, I would argue, is that you force yourself to model different information because of the different levels. And also, the way you can obtain the combination weights comes from the hierarchical structure. So it's a bit more constrained, the problem, which from a statistical point of view means that it's an easier problem, typically. Academic, I will always put a disclaimer. But that doesn't mean that forecast pooling doesn't work. In fact, if you start doing forecast pooling and hierarchical forecasting and temporal hierarchical forecasting, you see that all of them have diminishing returns. What we have seen, at least empirically, is that the temporal side is probably the one that gives the biggest boost. So I would start usually with that and then go to the other steps as well, depending what kind of decision I need to support. But they're all forecast combinations of one way or another. And that's why I'm saying they're very similar. It's quite, when we started working in hierarchical forecasting, we did not understand it straight away. I mean, we knew we were doing combination, but we did not understand how similar these two things were. And actually now, some of the active research we're doing now is combine the idea of pooling with hierarchical, in the sense that in forecast pooling, let's say you may produce 10 forecasts, and you may say, I will combine only the 6 of the 10 forecasts because the 4 are really bad, with whatever criterion you're using. In hierarchical forecasting, we say, okay, you have all the levels, we produce a forecast in all the levels, maybe we could eliminate some levels. How we eliminate the levels eventually is a forecast pooling question. Goes a bit more in technicalities. It's a fun question. I don't know the answer yet because it's active work, but next time I will have the answer.
Fantastic. I mean, then I know what article to look for. How far ahead is that? Is it like months or years?
I should be careful here not to put my co-author on the spot. I was on a sabbatical leave last year, and I was at Monash University, and with colleagues there we started working that. So George Athanasopoulos, who is actually one of the authors of the initial hierarchical forecasting with reconciliation papers, he has to co-author with me on that because he gets the odd message, says, where is that? And when he responds, then I take some time to respond. So academics.
Nice. Is there any other aspects of forecast pooling versus hierarchical forecasting? I mean, I know too little about the details, but I know that hierarchical forecasting is using the residuals when it's deciding on which forecast should get the weights. But I'm not really sure about forecast pooling, how that works. Is it also residuals, or?
You can frame it in many ways. So in hierarchical forecasting, taking the forecast errors, the residuals as you say, in some sense helps us get a feel of how variable is a forecast. And it also says if I would scale these errors based on the level of the hierarchy, then it would also give me a feel of how accurate or inaccurate is a forecast. And then I would weight it accordingly. So it helps me a bit in that sense. If I think about forecast combination or pooling, then I would say one way to obtain the weights is to weight them based on their accuracy. The difference in how we establish the weights is that in one case we model always the same time series, the same level, so we don't have to worry about the scale. Think for instance about a monthly forecast and an annual forecast. The monthly forecast could be, if they are of equal quality, should have errors that are 12 times smaller than the annual forecast, if of equal quality. So if I would just take the errors as they are and say, all right, how do I weight these two? I would always prefer the monthly forecast. That's where it's getting a bit complicated there. So in the hierarchical forecasting, we have to treat that as well. If I would have forecast combination, the errors are comparable in size. So if they're actually bigger, it's because it's less accurate. And it's as simple as that.
Okay. That's I've learned so many new things here today. And so interesting with your newest research. I know when we talked a couple of years ago, you were starting to explore the economic benefit of using hierarchical forecasting. Can you share any, I know that it's not published, but any insights based on that?
So that's still a very good question, because there is little research demonstrating, it's a lot of research demonstrating the benefits in accuracy. And often we assume that accuracy is a good proxy for benefits. That's something that at least myself have some question marks lately, because it really depends what you're going to do with this decision. Let's go for the easy decisions. Inventory, let's say management. In inventory management, we want essentially to say, all right, we want to cover the demand over the lead time, which is itself uncertain. So we need to have a buffer, a safety stock. How do we calibrate the safety stock? It's based on how volatile is the demand series, which, if you take it statistically, it's connected effectively with how big are your errors in a simplistic way. I mean, I think some of my colleagues would, look at me like strange. It's not like that. It's more technical. But beyond the point, it has to do with essentially we can connect the forecast errors one way or another. Now, if you think about that, you could say accuracy is sufficient, because the most accurate forecast will have the smallest forecast errors. Great. The thing is, though, that when we're making inventory decisions, there are more aspects that come in play. For instance, we may want to do order batching. We don't have the flexibility to order as we want. Or maybe there are disruptions in the supply chain that will force us to do different decisions. Or it may be contractual reasons. We may just get better value if we order above a particular quantity. all this would mean that when we translate something from the accuracy side to the financial benefit, there are other aspects that are beyond accuracy. So accuracy still remains a proxy for that. Now, so that's one side. Hierarchical forecasting will help with accuracy, great, but accuracy is not the end target if we think about the monetary side. And the other aspect is, we talked about this aligning of decisions. This is a bit more complicated. I was hoping that it would be a clean answer, but it's not a clean answer, because the question is, again, what do you do with the forecasts? Maybe at the bottom level you're doing this for, let's say, inventory planning. Maybe at another level you're doing it for planning your human resources. The way you plan human resources and the way you do your inventory planning, there are different decision processes. Some might be based on some optimization, some might be based on a more judgmental process. There will be inefficiencies no matter how you do it. And these inefficiencies may eventually destroy the value of the reconciliation or not. So what I'm trying to say is it's still difficult, and this is mainly because I'm coming from an academic point of view. It's not that I have a wealth of real data on my hands and saying like, all right, all the companies share their, that's where your side is a bit better equipped. But the idea is like, in theory, it's very easy to make the argument that, if everything works optimally, there is a benefit. And you can work out the equations. But if you go to practice, you can say, well, depending what actually is the decision you're supporting, and depending on the inefficiencies that are there, it may be a bit more complicated. So one of the PhD students that I've worked with has looked a lot about this problem, and he has looked on this problem in terms of staffing for transportation, actually. And he has shown that depending on the optimization you're going to do afterwards, because that's problems you can optimize, it may or may not have such a big difference. But that doesn't necessarily say, so therefore we put a question mark on the value, because my reading of the results, and this may change depending on the review process and how much more we understand, is that it really depends how we calibrate optimization. If we put too much pressure on the results from the optimization, it will destroy the value that you get from the reconciliation. So if I try to say it a bit simpler, if we don't make the decision process aware that we have made the forecast aligned, it will say, right, you just gave me some bunch of forecasts. I can move them freely to make my decisions. Whereas if I could somehow tell the decision process, look, these forecasts are already aligned. Everybody has said that these numbers contain all the information. Try to stay close to them. Then it would be more easy to show the benefit. So what I'm trying to say is that I would like it to be an easier answer, but it's a more complicated answer because in the firm there are so many steps in the analytics chain that you have the forecast, then you have the decision, then you have the translation to monetary. It's fun.
We're challenged by the same, to translate forecast accuracy to the economic benefit. And from our perspective, you need to link it back to the decisions. But it's hard to say like, okay, go back 3 years, you made this decision. If you would have had this other forecast pointing this way, and you know that this forecast was 30% more accurate, how would that have affected your decision? And it's hard to travel in time in general. So it's really hard to really translate the economic benefits of increasing forecasting accuracy.
That's right. And a bit of the work that I'm doing now is trying to identify other different metrics beyond accuracy. I don't want to give the wrong impression. It's not that accuracy is not important, but it shouldn't be 100% of our focus from a forecasting point of view. So can we design other metrics potentially that can correlate higher with the decision output? For example, in inventory management, you could arguably say you don't want a very volatile ordering pattern. It will make your suppliers, anxious. But it will also cause a lot of bullwhip in the supply chain. It will make, increase the variability across the supply chain, and eventually this will put costs higher for everybody. So in principle, you might have a benefit, let's say, by reducing the volatility of whatever is your decision outcome. You can design metrics, and that's, for instance, something we're trying to do in a different part of work, where we can track how volatile the decision will be based on the forecast without having to do the in-between calculations. Like, think it about like a correlation, but to the decision, something like that. I'm not going to technicalities because I don't think it's really helpful to get bogged down in technicalities. But all I'm trying to say is that my team is putting focus there. Other academics are also putting their focus. Can we design metrics that can complement accuracy, that can help simplify that? So we don't have to go and do exactly as you say, okay, let's go and find out what happened back then. Let's try to pretend that the situation is the same so we can translate the results. It's not perfect, but at least we understand that accuracy is not everything. And I think that's important.
Yeah. In our work, we often start with a proof of concept to evaluate how much would your accuracy improve if you would implement our forecasting platform. And that results often gets a good, within the management, they really like that we're improving the forecasting accuracy, and the fact that we're doing that evaluation, it will also increase the chances that they will use the forecast when they're making the decisions. And we often see it as like a process. We do the proof of concept, proving how much we will improve. Then they will keep their forecasting in parallel for some time to see, does it really improve? And then after that time, we see that the decisions are made upon the more accurate decisions. So it's like a long stepping stone towards really getting better decisions.
I think the evidence-based approach is the best approach. Like what you're doing is the best, because I don't like when people come and say, look, my forecast is better because it's implemented on a different color, so it's a better forecast. That doesn't hold. And this connects a bit with the hype that is surrounding, for instance, AI now, where everybody says, let's go with AI. AI is great, it's very useful, but we shouldn't throw away all the other knowledge we have already. And for me, if you don't demonstrate empirically that you get the benefits, by, as you correctly said, run what you did before, run the new solution in parallel. Get familiar with this, start trusting it, and trust it based on the results. Don't trust it because some smart person came and said, this is better. But the thing I can add here is that, although this is how I've also worked in the past, let's run this in parallel, let's collect the evidence. It's just that now I'm trying to move by tracking more things than just the accuracy. And this is ongoing research. It's not like I have already, here are the 5 things you should track. I'm not there yet. But I'm understanding that, the forecast is not the end target. Forecast is to support the decision. So when we track the forecast accuracy, we do it because it's a convenient way to separate the value added from the forecasting process. But that doesn't necessarily align with the real cost of the decision. And it's a very difficult discussion in itself. So by all means, we need to keep on tracking accuracy. We need to provide the evidence that there is a better accuracy here. It's just that saying and 10% improvement in accuracy means 10% improvement in inventory. I think that's a step in the logic that requires a bit more thinking, especially then if you would go and say, and 10% improvement in revenue. That is a very risky statement to make.
But from that perspective, I really like hierarchical forecasting because it aligns all of the different forecasting processes. So instead of having like the demand planners is doing the short-term forecasting and then the mid-term planning, they say like, oh, we can't use that demand forecasting because it's not considering X, Y, and Z. In hierarchical forecasting, everyone gets their will and all of the information is considered. So it should, improve the decisions in all of the levels in best case.
That's the argument. That's the argument, because even if we have all this discussion about accuracy, it's clear that if you can introduce new information, your forecast will be able to track what is going to happen better. If you're going to introduce information, let's say from the macro level at the aggregate forecast, and then bring that information down to the stock keeping units. For instance, there is something happening in the market as a whole. We had COVID a few years ago, our supply chain restrictions following from that and so on. These are things you can see at the macro level. You won't see it on the stock keeping unit demand until it's too late. So identifying these leading indicators at the top level is something that Indicision is doing, a lot of academics are doing. I've worked on that problem myself with colleagues. So if we can take that understanding and bring it in the stock keeping unit, then we can have a demand plan that will be aware that there is a shock coming. And that's the big difficulty.
Yeah.
And vice versa. In the demand planning, because we have high frequency data, daily demand or weekly demand, depending on the industry, maybe even hour by hour demand, you have a very fast signal from what's happening with your customers. So you can easily put a flag and say something is going on. Maybe there is a new product from our competitors, maybe the supply chain is out of stock and we haven't spotted it. Okay, that's a very bad example. Probably someone has spotted it, but you get the idea. So from one hand, you have all this external information that the company would not have otherwise. And from the other hand, you have all this high frequency information that the company might be too sluggish to react to. And you will tell me now, is that new? Didn't we do that in the past? Yes, we did it, but it was a lot more ad hoc, like if you're lucky you're doing it or not, and a lot more judgmental. And I'm not the person to take away judgment from forecasting. I think when people have information, they should incorporate in the forecast, but that doesn't mean we should become trigger happy with adjusting our forecasts. If we can do something in a model-based way and we can show that this is consistent and adds value, like introducing macro information, then do it like that. If you wake up and you go online and you read some relevant news article, there is no way the model knows that. So then you have to adjust your forecast. But again, if then, let's say you adjust the forecast at the mid-level or the higher level, you want this adjustment to be reflected at the bottom level, which is, to your point, the benefit of hierarchical forecasting.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the discussion.
Answering all of these strange questions. It's been really nice to pick your brain and get your view upon all of these aspects.
I'm an academic, so strange question is what I really enjoy. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for being here.